Arkham Asylum, the home for the criminally insane, stood on a wooded hillside several miles outside Gotham City Center. High brick walls topped with razor wire kept unwelcome intruders out and would-be fugitives in. Its crow-stepped gables and Gothic turrets rose above the beeches and elms, scraping at the sky like fingers silhouetted against the moon. Here and there windows were lit, backlighting the thick metal bars that guarded them. Dozens of gargoyles brooded at the corners of the roof, their fierce glares and bared fangs designed to keep all evil at bay. In that, the gargoyles had failed. Arkham Asylum housed more evil than all other penitentiaries and institutions in North America combined. Its rambling corridors and Victorian rooms were home away from home to arch-villains such as the Joker, Two-Face, and the brutal Killer Croc. At any one time, it might be expected to have Clayface, the toxic Poison Ivy, and the ventriloquist and his dummy Scarface within its somber walls. As Alfred guided the Rolls-Royce around a bend in the road that ran past the asylum grounds, the sunroof opened and Batman exited. There was a brief sense of a shadow swooping upward, of black scalloped wings taking to the air. The car continued on its way without slowing, making for the little-known back roads that would take it to Wayne Manor. Alfred had some research to do. In the branches of a tree that overhung the road, Batman briefly paused to consider his route. His nightscope brought the 100-year-old building into focus. He saw the stooped shape of Jeremiah Arkham passing a window, making his long night rounds. Batman had a lot of reasons to criticize Jeremiah, especially over security lapses, but he knew that the asylum owner cared deeply for his charges. He genuinely wanted to make some of the most evil people in the world well again. Until he succeeded, Batman would be there to pick up the pieces. As Jeremiah passed, Batman made a snap decision, then moved into action. He scrambled up into the higher branches until they became too thin to bear his weight. A bat line carried a grapnel to a main branch of the ancient elm that stood opposite the one he was situated in, and he swung across the road 20 feet from the ground. Batman knew the location of every closed-circuit TV camera on the grounds, and timed his passage to coincide with their swiveling lenses. 2 security guards patrolled the gardens and woods with German shepherd dogs. Batman waited patiently till they'd stopped to share a cigarette.
So, how'd the blind date go last night?
Before he moved again. 20 seconds later, he was seeking handholds on ivy stems thicker than his wrists as he clambered up the asylum wall. Built as a private house around the same time as Wayne Manor, the asylum was a product of a bygone age, when media magnates and railroad tycoons vied with one another to build the most luxurious palace for their families. No expense had been spared, vast fortunes had been spent. But whereas the Waynes had gone from strength to strength, the family that built Arkham had lost its wealth and been forced to sell its palace. Now, both buildings hid their innermost secrets from the world of man. Batman stepped off the spreading ivy that encased half the frontage onto a foot-wide ledge that ran along the third-floor level. His back to the wall, he moved swiftly along it until he came to a darkened, bar-covered window. Inside the bars, the lettered glass window pane swung open.
Clancy? Is that you, my trusted lieutenant?
Afraid not, Scarecrow. I busted Clancy 3 nights ago. He's sweating in a holding cell on Blackgate Island.
Batman moved so Scarecrow could see his cowl. Moonlight streamed between the bars, enabling Batman to see the figure inside. The body seemed stooped and twisted, yet still tall and with a wiry strength. It was enclosed in a costume made from burlap, with sticks of straw jutting from the cuffs at wrist and ankle. A sackcloth hood covered the head, topped by a ridiculous floppy hat. The eyes that blazed out from the slits in the hood were the eyes of a madman, not the eyes of respected university professor Jonathan Crane. Jeremiah Arkham believed in allowing his criminally psychotic charges to live out their fantasies until treatment had progressed to a certain point. That way, he was more likely to gain their trust. He discovered long ago that forcing them to wear asylum drabs provoked more trauma than it was worth.
Come to gloat, have you? After all, you put me here, despite the fact I'm not insane. You're the one who's crazy. Look at you. You dress like a bat. You fly around at night. You hide your face behind a mask. Isn't that insane?
I'm not the one who left 2 security guards crippled by fear gas. It wasn't me who condemned their families to a lifetime of misery.
Collateral damage. There's always fallout when a repressed society tries to smother the creativity of its true individuals. Those guards stood between me and my destiny.
You mean the Assyrian clay tablets you stole? You think books are worth more than a man's life?
Books are worth more than anything.
Scarecrow's long, skinny arms wrapped themselves around his body, and a strange hug that seemed to reassure him.
Books are the repository of all knowledge. Books are more precious than gold.
Batman adjusted his stance on the ledge, leaning in closer.
I haven't come here to argue with you, Crane.
Professor Crane is out. Scarecrow is in.
As a child, Jonathan Crane had been severely traumatized by a flock of birds. Perhaps his vivid imagination had been fired by some illicit viewing of the Hitchcock movie, or perhaps he really had been attacked. No one but him would ever know. For years he'd hidden his growing psychosis from the world, until it had erupted one day in the psychology class he taught at Gotham University. The good professor turned a gun on his students, purely to illustrate a point, of course. The university authorities didn't see things the same way. His foolishness cost Crane his job, and so began his abrupt slide into poverty and obscurity. Crane didn't care too much about the lack of recognition, but he badly needed money for buying his life's obsession: books. He turned to crime, adopting the sinister imagery of the Scarecrow. Birds had frightened him, scarecrows frightened birds. Now Jonathan Crane, alias the Scarecrow, would frighten everybody. Fear became his stock in trade. His scientific genius allowed him to concoct a range of gases that could inflict fear or terror or dread on anyone who absorbed them. As his ambitions grew, he experimented with gases that caused fear of specific things. Scarecrow loved to watch an arachnophobe, for instance, imagining he was covered in revolting spiders, or a claustrophobe believing he was entombed alive in his coffin.
All right, Scarecrow. I'm here for 2 reasons. First, to verify that you really are here, and not some ringer, while the real Scarecrow goes on a rampage.
I'll have you know, sir, that I would personally deal with any such imposter. There is but one of me.
Relax. I've heard more than enough to know it's you. Secondly, I want to ask you a favor.
And what precisely would you want of me?
A recipe for one of your fear gases.
Oh, yes. I do have a certain reputation as an altruist to maintain. I mean, I always bestow favors on lunatics who have me locked away.
I'll give you something in return. I'll give you a book, a first edition.
The Dark Knight knew his enemy well. If there was one thing Scarecrow cared for with a passion that defied explanation, it was books. In secret stores and warehouses throughout the city, the Master of Fear had a collection of millions that he had bought or stolen over the years. It was his ambition to own every book in the world, from those written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs to the latest bestseller. Beneath his grotesque hood, Scarecrow's eyes lit up. He drummed his fingertips lightly against his sack-covered mouth.
A first edition? By whom? Shakespeare, perhaps? Marlowe? Spencer? Or are we talking Jackie Collins?
We're talking universe. Scudder Clyce's universe.
A work of genius, yes, but valuable. For a pittance, I'm certain I can purchase a copy on eBay.
The author's personal copy? In mint condition, with handwritten margin notes and a previously unpublished addendum?
Do you jest with me, sir? Is this another of your fiendish schemes to torture a poor man incarcerated against his will?
Clyce's Universe was one of the most peculiar of all American books. Published privately in the early 20th century, it was an idiosyncratic and highly original interpretation of existence. A verifiable solution of the riddle of the universe, as Clyce himself put it. Only 1,000 copies had ever been printed, and most of them had disappeared from view. But the author's own copy was a rarity of great distinction.
I would give much to possess this book. My services for, say, the coming year. Or a blank check drawn on an offshore account in the Windward Islands.
Nothing so expensive. A recipe will be enough. For a very special fear gas.
Name your terror, my man.
Just one thing. You double-cross me, and I will ensure you stay in Arkham for the rest of your life. The hospital wing.
My word, sir, is my bond.
The moon was incandescent in the nighttime sky as Batman swung again into the trees and out of the asylum grounds. He vaulted down onto the grass verge and, keeping to shadows, ran toward the nearest buildings half a mile away. Once there, he would disappear among the rooftops. When dawn came, and it was time to retire to the Batcave, one of the many Batmobiles hidden around the city would be his transport. Bruce Wayne had found the old book in the cavernous attic of the manor, still wrapped in heavy, ornate paper, a Christmas gift to his great-great-grandfather, possibly from Clyce himself. But the old man had died on Christmas Eve, and there would be no celebration in the Wayne household that year. Since then, the book had waited in its dusty home. It was a high price to pay to a criminal, Batman knew, but the formula Scarecrow had given him might prove invaluable. An insurance policy against, he didn't know what.